Alright guys, Scrappy again. I hope you're doing well and enjoying your day. So far, the three-peat is complete. The first team to go back-to-back-to-back in tournaments in a very long time indeed. Since the OpTic dynasty, in fact, Atlanta FaZe have done exactly that. And maybe the only team that could have stopped them today, getting bopped out of the tournament in emphatic fashion at the first time of asking. Huge storylines resulting here from Major 2 in Dallas. FaZe get the victory in dominant fashion at the end of the day. Very much into your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I greatly appreciate it. Plenty to get into. We're going to start with the first series, obviously, but before we get to that, we're going to start with challenges, some of the final series in challenges, because after a historic weekend in challenges, I don't really know how to describe it, right? I mean, it was up and down, let's say. It was delayed, there were problems, and it was Bance and the boys on mission. Magpies in the grand final, they had a phenomenal run to get all the way there, but in the end, it was actually aBeZy's team that took the win. This, of course, being very notable. I told you guys for the last couple of weeks, winning this tournament is a big deal, because teams are going to make changes after this event in the Pro League. There is basically no doubt about that. I think what this weekend has shown is that there is a serious discrepancy in the CDL between the best teams and the rest teams. And some of these guys may be in the conversation. So it's aBeZy's and the boys. They get the win. aBeZy's, Brack, Standy, Johnny. They take down Bansico in the grand finals. Johnny was considered the MVP for the tournament. In some respects, he had a 1.56 in the grand finals, 1.22 overall. And of course, that's Johnny, notable for, his stint in the Pro League before. Whether he'll get an opportunity again, that is a big question after this, and as Nastie says, back-to-back land champ. So, very notable result this weekend. iLLey's team, of course, that was the Stallions. They bombed out pretty early on. Omit Brooklyn, they bombed out pretty early on, but the other Omit team, these guys, they won the entire tournament, right? And as Bant says, couldn't buy a kill in the respawn. GG's, but this schedule blows, right? As Bant says, played winners final till 1:30 AM last night, woke up to play a team who's won back-to-back games, always been a rule higher seed can choose sides. Admins refuses it would take too long to set up, got destroyed in 4 respawns, but basically challenges is kind of chalked. So frustrating weekend for many of the players. Basically everyone was frustrated with challenges this weekend in some capacity, but at the end of the day, the teams that made it deep in the tournament, they will be notable in terms of getting picked up potentially. So intrigued to your thoughts on that in the comments below. Let's dive though in to the matches of the day. Zoom was getting cooked unfortunately to kick things off. But this, in many respects, was the series of the day, and that was Toronto versus the Los Angeles Thieves. Now, look, I've been saying, I wouldn't say I've been waxing lyrical exactly, but I've been talking for a good time now that Toronto have been better than they've appeared. I think that's kind of been my perspective on it, really, because there were people telling me in Madrid that Toronto in scrims were like the best team. Like these guys are godlike. And we never really saw that in matches. We saw it from time to time, but certainly on LAN in Madrid, there wasn't, much evidence of them kind of getting over the hurdle there. And what I find incredible about Toronto is that every single year, the level of talent on their team, like I rate Beans and JoeDeceives very highly, Insights and CleanX excellent as well, but, Scrap and Envoy were there last year, they've departed for Thieves, of course the team that they played up against today. And despite the fact that they, had to find replacements, Toronto still find a way to be competitive. I think it deserves a lot of commendation, as it were, to that franchise in the way that they've been able to put this together. The way that they approach COD, I think, is definitely up there with being the most professional of the teams. They treat it like a serious sport. We know that they've hired performance coaches, right? The breathing exercises these guys do, doing things properly as a team, right? I think there's multiple factors why Toronto have been a very impressive franchise, and that continues to be the case this year. They take things, seriously. I think they do things properly over there at this organization, and it results in a team that is always going to be competitive at some point. They may not be there every single event, but at least at some point every season Toronto will be there, and I think they might well make a grand finals like this if they keep playing in this way, because the talent on this team is somewhat undeniable, really. JoeDeceives has been playing out of his skin, Benjamin Beans as well. Look, he's sometimes hot and cold, but when he's hot, I mean, he's on fire, and Toronto played some great COD today. On the other side of things though, Thieves should never be losing in this way, especially to a team that those guys left right last season to join Los Angeles Thieves with HyDra, and with HyDra in the lobby, with Envoy in the lobby, and with CleanX in the lobby, JoeDeceives is the best sub by a margin in this series, right? And that was incredibly impressive indeed. But Thieves, I thought they were going to get slammed to 14 points like they did by Toronto back in Cold War at this rate, because the way this map 1 started was absolutely crushing, and it never really changed. Toronto blew them off the face of the map, and it was a very interesting storyline coming into the major, whether Thieves, after going 7-0 in the qualifiers, could actually execute and whether they could actually get the job done when it mattered in a LAN environment. And for how good Thieves have been online, I think many expected them to carry that through. But in terms of their execution, look, they know they've got a super team on paper. They know they've got all the talent in the world. They know that they should have been there up on the stage with FaZe in the grand finals, potentially giving them a great series as they were back in Madrid. But this time, that's not how it went at all. And I think there's big questions as to why. Because, look, let's be real, Thieves came out against Boston, complacent, I would say. They expected to win that series. Boston played really well, for sure. But it's not a series that Thieves would ever expect to lose. And the thing is, if you're the number 1 seed and you lose that first round series, you find yourself with a difficult losers bracket run to come, which they got through pretty impressively. But even then, yesterday they played last game having not played all day. It puts you in a difficult spot when you lose as the number 1 seed. If you're the number 1 seed, you've got to win. That's kind of the point of being the number 1 seed. And today they were just, nowhere near where they would like to be. The teamwork wasn't there. Individually, the guys weren't on form. And I think there's a lot to take away for Thieves today. I think they will learn a lot from this tournament. I would imagine that they came into this tournament expecting to have no real issues getting all the way to the grand finals. That was clearly not the case at all. They ran into a hot Toronto team, but they got absolutely embarrassed by said Toronto team, eventually taking the map 2, and they won the game 3 as well. So for Thieves to get 3-0 today by Toronto, now look, sure, the Toronto win against Thieves makes OpTic's situation look a little bit better in a way, because, a great team like Thieves also got 3-0'd, but it's not like Toronto went on to win the event. So it's not like OpTic fans can sleep easy tonight knowing that the team that beat them was the best team in the game by far. That's clearly not quite the case, but Thieves just nowhere near their level, and I think they've got a real lot to think about over the next couple of weeks here, Thieves, as to how exactly they've gone from being looking so dominant online to turning up to LAN and not being able to execute right. It's all this, everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth, and I'm not really sure Thieves were able to recover it. I mean, it was almost like watching the OpTic team of recent weeks at times, when they've clearly got the talent there, but when things go wrong, they've not really been able to, the comms sounded awful as well compared to how they have sounded in recent weeks, and getting, let's say in a winning mentality and a winning mindset just did not seem possible for Los Angeles Thieves today. The energy from Toronto was spectacular. JoeDeceives was turning on everyone. It was actually a masterclass to watch here. And this was probably the trash talk moment of the weekend, in my opinion, which was JoeDeceives standing up and saying, I got dropped from that, right? That's the team that dropped me, and slammed them out of the major. So, the trash talk this weekend has been sensational. Beans was letting them know as well. Beans has a great personality. I think the guy is great, always entertaining, of course controversial, but, the best personalities are obviously controversial. And here he goes on to the other side of the stage to fist bump these guys straight out of the tournament. Frankly embarrassing, I think, for Thieves. Going in as the number 1 seed, having one of the best online stints you're ever going to see, and to crash out like this to the organisation that was trying to clown you before the season. I mean, this was aBeZy. People were clowning him for this tweet when he said, oh, we're going to have a better team than Thieves in 2025. Will that prove to be true? It's a long season still to go. The World Championship is really the big one. But still, aBeZy made the point. We're going to be better than Thieves. And when it mattered today, they got the job done. I love the fact as well that Beans was taking receipts here. So here he is. And Scrap told him on the 25th of February, I'll double your prize claim if you make it top 4. And, Beans goes, GG's 3-0, slammed. FaZe Surge next and tweets out the graphic. I mean, this got 7,000 likes. So he was holding this one for the moment. I thought that was brilliant. But as Scrap says, yeah, super embarrassing for Thieves. I think there's a lot to say on that team over the next couple of days, because that kind of archetype of the faltering super team is a big deal in COD and in any esport, really. And the idea of a team that is so good potentially, it either works out emphatically or it collapses in flames. That's usually how these super teams tend to end. And today was an example that Thieves, have a lot to think about in terms of their execution in a LAN environment. And I know there's been lots to talk about it during the weekend, because of course the Thieves guys live here in Texas. So if you live here locally, what do? Do you live at home and then you travel up to the venue every day? Do you get a hotel by the venue? There was talk about Thieves maybe having different mentalities on that. And, maybe it changes the way that you approach the weekend to some degree. But I'm sure there's a lot to learn for Thieves. I think they'll be back. I think they'll be back stronger. but Toronto really showed up to them. And JoeDeceives drops a 1.5 against his former team. Doesn't get too much better than that. So Thieves out of the tournament. FaZe versus Surge, then this was the banger series, really. I mean, this was what it was all about. Game 5, round 11, the first time in like 24 series that we actually had a Game 5, and it finally happened. And to be honest, FaZe, in the initial hardpoints, were just not playing at the pace I think they needed to play at. They were letting Surge run rings around them at time. They lost the Game 1, but FaZe's search and destroy proved again to be critical. It was the case before, and I think for FaZe now, they're in a position where, as a team, they seem to have got over this hump of not being able to deliver in the grand finals. I think that Matt Fisher, who's working with them, of course, on the performance coaching side, probably has a part to play in that. But it seems like FaZe are incredibly well drilled, and with no Thieves and the talent that they have to really do some damage, it was difficult to imagine anyone was going to be able to stop them really here. And their search and destroy just a little bit too good. The control, that was FaZe's in the end, and a big control of that on the protocol. Of course, they played it again in the grand finals to very similar effect. And in the end, it was a crazy Game 5, round 11, really, actually. This could have changed the tides of the tournament, but realistically, was it going to be any different result in the end? Were FaZe realistically going to lose to Surge, even if Surge had won this series? Probably not, but I think it did change the momentum of the tournament to some degree. So Surge go down, I mean, like, great series from Neptune, Nastie, all of those guys played well, but in the end it was the search and destroys that got FaZe over the line in the finals. They got to deliver in their respawn modes as well. Then it was Toronto versus Surge. Fascinating series on paper, really, and I think that Toronto were looking so on point, but Surge are just really good. I think Toronto still have this kind of, tendency to be a little bit up and down. I think you see that right about here. This was, though, another one of the best trash talk moments of the day. The way that he was pointing at them, I thought was brilliant, right? Like, he's almost telling them off, like a teacher telling off a student. I thought it was absolutely hilarious the way that he was speaking really slow and deliberately to say, look, Beans, look at me, Beans, look at me, and all this type of stuff. So Neptune was talking all kinds of trash. Beans, of course, after winning the Game 2, then fought back. I think Abuzah clutched a 1v2 at one point and stood up and said, Beans, you're fat, whatever, right? And then obviously Beans was giving it large back to him at the end of the map as well. So there's been some phenomenal trash talk this weekend. And, there were some funny reactions to it on plenty of the watch parties today as well. I don't really know what it is, right? Because, these kids are good kids, right? But whatever it takes on the main stage, the energy is going to be electric in the venue. And that's certainly what was the case on the main stage today. And even as Dashy says, everyone talking trash after every single map this event, which pretty much was the case. And as Pred says, the trash talk this event has been too good. CDL HyDra Central goes, when do you plan on getting involved? Right, let's get a couple more series wins on the board. But Surge versus Ultra, this in the end was a 3-1. It was pretty close, but again, the respawns from Surge a little bit too good. The Game 1 will be the gutting one for Ultra because, again, that was a very winnable Game 1. They had their opportunities in the Game 1. I think still, Toronto played really well this tournament. CleanX didn't have a great series to close out the tournament, and, Nastie with a 1.4, Neptune with a 1.3. Neptune easily one of the very best players in the game right now. The guy's absolutely unbelievable, and it's crazy to see the career resurgence from him. And then we get to the grand finals, and frankly, this was not competitive at all. The only team of the day that had all won events prior, and I just think FaZe, the Drazah pickup for those guys has just been so effective. Like, since they picked up Drazah, they've made so many grand finals, and I think to some degree, it's the fact that the competition for them has not been, as good as it could have been. Toronto last year, of course, New York to some degree last year, OpTic last year, of course, was serious contenders. But this year, right now, OpTic have fallen off. Surge can beat them, sure, online, and they could have beat them earlier in the tournament. When it comes to a grand finals, pressure on, FaZe are just, they've got so much experience now on this main stage. The talent is so extreme, and as I've said before, I think I don't want to put loads of credit on this performance coaching thing, but like, they used to make finals and lose. They've found a way to play their best card in the grand finals on the main stage, and they walk away with the championship, which frankly was very underwhelming. Like, they looked like, as soon as Thieves lost to Boston, they were the clear favourites, and Thieves couldn't find their form this weekend. I think there was really no one that expected FaZe to lose this after Thieves were out of the tournament, right? And that's how indomitable they have now become, and frankly undeniable when it comes to these scenarios. And, the grand finals, in the end, it was just an absolute masterclass from FaZe. From start to finish, they destroyed Surge in every single map that they played. There was a bit of chirping going down, of course, as well. And look, Surge, hopefully for their sake, they make it back to this kind of stage again. it's been impressive. I think that they've, done what they've done. The turnaround they've made has been incredible, for sure. But delivering against FaZe on the main stage in the grand final in front of a massive crowd here in Texas, that is a big deal. And they win their third tournament in a row, EWC in Riyadh, Major 1, Major 2, for just the first time in 9 years since the OpTic Dynasty did it. So the other teams know they got to lock in, and they got to lock in quick, because FaZe are not going to slow down anytime soon. So very much interested to your thoughts in the comments. Much to discuss over the coming days. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.